All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about what are your KPIs hiding. We're excited to have Rob Kalwarowsky with us from Rob's Reliability Project. A lot of folks probably know Rob from LinkedIn. Very active on there, and he's got this awesome podcast, which we're excited that UE Systems is featured on that podcast this week. So kind of a cool week for both groups here. So if you've got some time later today or sometime this week to check out his podcast, we've got Doug Wagen talking all things ultrasound for steam inspection. So if that's steam is something that you guys work with, definitely worth taking a listen to that. So Rob, thanks for your support, and we're happy to then have you come and share what knowledge that you've got around these KPIs. So before I toss things over to Rob, just a couple housekeeping things. Those of you that are our regulars have heard this all a million times, but just bear with me. It's like the security safety briefing before a flight. So just want to let you know, Rob is letting us record this. So I'm doing that, and we'll get the recording of this webinar up on our website later today. So if you have to hop off, or if you've got a colleague that wanted to listen in, it's certainly something you can go back and take a listen to later on. We definitely welcome questions. We want to we love doing these things live so we can make them interactive. So you can type those into the little questions box. I'll be monitoring those, and I'll toss questions over to Rob throughout if it makes sense, if someone needs some clarification on something, or of course we'll have some Q&A time at the end. Again, just because we're live, just bear with us. If we have any audio or internet issues, we'll just jump on that as quick as we can to get those resolved. But that's the little bit of risk we run doing these live. So just know that we'll try and fix it as quickly as we can. And with that, I am going to turn the screen over to Rob and let him get started.
Perfect. No, thanks, Maureen, and thanks for having me. And I hope everyone checks out the podcast this week. I was just joking with Maureen before we came on here that we planned this all ahead, and now we're looking like geniuses. But yeah, so the full podcast came out last night. Obviously, as Maureen mentioned, Doug was on to talk steam traps. And if you're looking for the podcast, just go to iTunes or Stitcher. It's on 11 different platforms. So wherever you want, just Google Rob's Reliability Project and it'll pop up. And I hope you enjoy it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about KPIs. Before we get into it, I'll give you a little background on me, and then we can kind of get started. So I'm Rob Kalwarowsky. Currently now I'm working as an asset management engineer, but before that I spent around 8 to 9 years as a reliability engineer in both mining, consulting, and doing the consulting. I touched a bunch of different industries: manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, the whole kind of range of it. Obviously, I'm the host of Rob's Reliability Project podcast, and it's more than just a podcast. I put out a ton of stuff on LinkedIn, so I would recommend, if you don't follow that page already, just get on there. I'll post probably about 3 times a day, sometimes more, with just little tidbits that I'm coming across. So some of you would have seen this if you've been following the LinkedIn page. And one of my posts every day is a meme. And so I posted this one because I've seen it in so many industries at so many different sites. Is if you take a look at the KPIs and you look at, what's management tracking, you look at the dashboards, you look at the different metrics, a lot of times everything looks good. And it's really difficult to kind of dive into them to figure out what's actually going on at a plant until you really go out there and have a look around, have a walk around, and really get into the nuts and bolts of the processes. So it's just a little tongue-in-cheek look, but I'm sure it, like if you've seen this throughout your career, I'm sure you have. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what to do, what to not do, and then some best practices. Before we sort of jump into that, let's talk a little bit about metrics versus key performance indicators. So I went online and I searched for KPIs, and they're really looking at, essentially, they're the most important metrics. They're the ones that directly contribute to your business objectives. So if we're thinking about ISO 55000 and asset management, a lot of what you're going to have to do to kind of achieve that level of asset management is align your organization towards its corporate goals, whether that's profit, environmental, safety, community, whatever those goals are, everything should be aligned. And KPIs really should measure that that type of alignment. So what are those goals and where are you at relative to those goals? Metrics are kind of the more granular level of those. They can be on pretty much anything. And I'm sure most of you listening have probably hundreds, if not thousands, of metrics that your company tracks. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. So I like this quote: every KPI is a metric, but not every metric is a KPI. And that's a big thing, is kind of over tracking metrics. And so just to be aware of that, I'll probably use the word metric throughout the presentation because KPI is going to be more specific to your organization, and it'll need kind of a little bit more context around it than just metric. Next one here. So this will be kind of the last of the definition stuff, but we need to talk about leading versus lagging indicators. And so for many of you who have taken the CMRP exam, this is one of the topics they cover, is the difference between leading and lagging, and which ones are leading and which ones are lagging. Lagging indicators are after the result has happened. They're not predictive in any way. A lot of examples: availability, units produced, maintenance unit cost. A lot of the stuff that we track in reliability is going to be a lagging indicator. They're more of your performance types. Leading indicators are before the result can happen. And oftentimes, if you pick them correctly, they're going to actually predict your performance. So examples, PM hours, proactive work, planned work. So if you're thinking about it, if we do more PMs versus reactive work, or we do more proactive work versus reactive work, we should see an improvement in reliability. Now, I put a picture of the buff guy on this slide because when I talk about leading and lagging indicators, I always like to use the example of my goal is to become more fit. And my leading indicators for my fitness would be: how many workouts do I do in a week? How many healthy meals do I eat in a week? So those would be driving my success. So if I've, gone to the gym 7 times in a week and I've eaten 21 healthy meals, I will be on track to increase my fitness level. And then on the opposite side, my lagging indicators would be something like: how much weight did I lose, or how much muscle did I gain? Those types of things, they're happening once you've done the leading indicators for a few months. Then you'll start to see those lagging indicators catch up. And in reliability sense, that could take a year, it could take 2 years, depending on which metrics you've picked. The last thing I'll say on this is, in some instances, a metric can be both a leading and a lagging indicator. And so it's not always black and white. You'll just have to kind of look at what you're trying to accomplish. with your metric. And that's kind of the genesis of metrics, is they're not as simple as they seem. Like I was looking at the CMRP best practice metrics manual the other day when I was putting this together, and I tried to come up with one of the most simple metrics I could find. And it was one of the top ones, uptime. So uptime, in all likelihood, it's essentially how much time is my plant able to run, or is it running? Now, I have seen throughout the years that some places, they take out the time that the plant's closed for holidays, or they take out plant shutdown, or they take out this or that, and it affects not necessarily the uptime, but it affects that percentage of uptime, which most of you will call availability. And so it's not exactly as simple as just, oh, it's the hours the plant ran. Sometimes people will include stuff, sometimes people will take it out. It just depends on what they're trying to do, whether that's good or not. Similarly to hours. So I mentioned I used to work in mining, and we were actually looking at the haul trucks, which is pictured here. It was a different model, but regardless, these trucks, we were trying to measure essentially how old these trucks were, as it's an important reliability metric when you're trying to do failure analysis or Weibull analysis and predict outcomes. And we had a bunch of different metrics from the hours. Like operating hours is when the truck is driving around doing its haul cycle. Service meter units is just when the engine is running. So it may include times like coffee break or lunch or whatever. There's delay time, there's idle time. These are more on the operating side. And I always like to relate this because to me, the point of the metric is it's going to be very dependent on what you're trying to do with it. So with this one here, I remember the operations group, they came to me and they were trying to ask me like what they wanted to, they came with a list of it was over 20 different classifications for time when you're driving the truck. And they said to me like, Rob, like, what should we do? Should we track all of these? Like, what do you care about as a reliability engineer? And to me, all I care about, like, I don't need 20 classifications. What I need is the truck running? Is it not running? And if it's not running, then is it a maintenance issue or not? That's really as far as I need to know. And so that's the question, is what's the point? It's cool now in 2019 that, you can buy data really easily, and you can buy storage for, $100 for a terabyte. But what are you doing with the metric? What's the point of it? What goal are you trying to achieve? These are some questions that you should ask yourself before you start just picking new ones to look at. And so that's kind of the thing with metrics, is you have to really think about it in advance. It's kind of like your reliability program. You just don't just jump in and start swimming. You have to kind of put some forethought in there before you get started. So maybe not, well, you can put it in the comments and I'll take a look at it later. But what I want you to think about is, why does your company use metrics? Are you looking at metrics? Who's looking at metrics? And feel free, if you want, you can send me an email, robsreliabilityproject@gmail.com, if you want to share that with me, and I'll give you my thoughts. But it's also just a good exercise to think about is, are we measuring too many? Are we not measuring enough? Are we measuring things that are useful? Or are we doing the Homer Simpson and we're measuring something, but it's not actually reflective of reality? So when we're looking at metrics, really, what is the goal of a metric? Are you using it to improve? Like, are you looking at diagnosing an issue and saying like, well, given that my profitability is not increasing, why is that the case? Well, it's because my maintenance is going up and my assets are getting older, like these types of questions? Or is it usually what people use it for, which is, this is for your bonus, you're not hitting metrics, we need to push you harder, kind of like a jockey riding a horse. So kind of mentioned it, what should we be using metrics for? We should be using them to diagnose problems. We should be using them to track our business processes. So when we're doing a reliability initiative, we should be like, let's say we're going out there with our UE ultrasound gun and we're going out there to look at steam traps. We need to figure out what those metrics would look like. Maybe that's what percentage of steam traps are broken. Maybe that's how often are we able to do the condition monitoring assessment? Is that monthly? Are we hitting 100% each month, or are we hitting 80% or 50%? What are we doing? And then once we have that data, maybe the next step is, what percentage of critical steam traps have we fixed? So something like that is going to be super useful to help us achieve that program. What we usually use them for, obviously bonuses, financial incentives, and then disciplining people, which we'll talk about why that's not a hot idea. So I always make this joke that I would love to have metrics if they're automatically calculated and nobody knew they existed except for me. And the reason I say that is, if they're automatically calculated, that removes some aspect of human intervention, where sometimes when people are typing in, they'll make mistakes. Sometimes they'll intentionally make mistakes. And then the second one is, no one knew they existed except for me. Then they're true representations of what's going on. And I'm able to actually dive into it, troubleshoot problems, and then plan and execute fixes for those problems. So we've done a little bit of a background, and so now I put together, because I know everybody likes lists, I put together 10 things to consider when using metrics. The first one is that measurement changes behavior. And so I first learned this from Calvin Williams when we were talking about continuous improvement. And he mentioned that the Hawthorne effect is prevalent. And what you'll find is, usually when you go out and you start putting metrics on a process to track your improvement project, you may find that there's improvement when you didn't do anything noticeable. And so there's an issue to that. And so if we jump back to the example about steam traps, if we never measured, if we always were doing these steam trap inspections and we didn't really know how effective they were, and we didn't really know what percentage of steam traps of the critical ones we were looking at each month, and we didn't know all this information, we wouldn't necessarily know that our program was good or bad. But once we start measuring it, what you'll see is the people who are being measured, they're going to automatically sort of conform to that measurement. And so their performance will increase. Sometimes this can happen over a period like 3 months or 6 months, but generally within a few years, it'll go back to normal. Like it's kind of like a new car type of thing, where for the first little while you're all excited, and then a couple years in, you're kicking the door closed. So just be aware that when you're running an improvement project, you should probably institute the metrics before you make the change to the process, so then you can kind of get some normalization. The second thing I want people to be careful about is that incentives change behavior. So I'll give you a couple stories around these ones here. The first one, I'm sure you've all seen it, unreported safety incidents. So I'll give you 2 examples of these. The first one was this one site was close to getting their million man-hour safety bonus, uh, which was a couple $100, and the prestige of being the safest site. And these were this was for no lost time incidents. And they had a guy, he broke his leg on site, and they actually put him on light, quote unquote, light duty. I think he became a planner for a while to sort of avoid the fact that he would have otherwise had an LTI. Now, this is kind of a behavior you don't want, right? You don't want an unreported safety incident. So that's one that's kind of a poor example for this. Another one I have here for schedule compliance is we were doing an audit, a reliability type of audit on a bunch of sites at the same company. And we already knew that this one site out of the bunch was the worst performer because we had their cost data. And so you could see that this one was by far the worst. Now, when we dove into their metrics, they actually were the best. So they were pulling a Homer Simpson on us. And we really didn't. We were trying to figure out what was going on. And we went out there, and one of the things that was happening was they were 100% schedule compliance, even though we knew they were doing a bunch of reactive work. And so what was happening was they were putting small jobs in as a 12-hour job. And the example I'll give you is they had a filter change in as a 12-hour job, which maybe it takes an hour, probably less than that. But they were hitting that 100% schedule compliance because people were looking at that number and they were trying to, they were bonusing people off of it, that type of thing. So you have to be really careful about tying incentives to metrics. Similarly on this is if you track it, they're going to hit it. It's kind of the same thing, but the difference here is I always like to say people hit metrics because they want to. Some of that is going to be a good thing. So I know some of these companies, they get on these outrageous targets and they try to push people. If someone can't achieve a metric, they're going to cheat to make it happen, whether that's something that you want or not. And the second thing is depending on what that metric is, that may be a good thing or it may be a bad thing. So sometimes you'll get stuff like we had negative operating hours on one thing at one site I was at. Sometimes the other thing will be something like if you talk to like an MRO person and they're getting bonused off of how many turns their inventory does. Sometimes what'll happen is they'll reduce their inventory count to get their turns up, which they're not necessarily gaming the metric, but it's not an outcome that you wanted. So you just have to be really careful with some of the secondary outcomes of picking metrics. Number 4, metric overload. I'm sure you've all seen this. A lot of companies have hundreds or thousands of metrics, and they're just really difficult to get a hold of. And not only are they difficult to get a hold of, they're difficult to really be useful. Like I think most people, they're good at tracking 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 metrics. And then once you get over 5 or 6, they start to just, the glaze goes over their eyes. So what I always recommend with this one is if you're doing an improvement project, the best I've ever seen was 4 metrics, one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you can put 4 nice boxes, 4 nice graphs on that one piece of paper. You can track 4 metrics, and then you can print it off and tape it to the wall or tape it to the door or on the pin board or whatever. So then people see it, it's visible, there's colors, and everyone can get a handle on what's going on. Similarly to that, those metrics should be aligned with your corporate goals. This is something that I don't know if every company has done, but you really have to think about the guy on the shop floor who is bonused off of, or maybe not even bonus, but who is tracked off of this one metric. Is there a path for him to connect that to either the overall profitability of the site, the overall safety of the site, the overall, community engagement, whatever that is? You need to be able to draw that line. And that's not only going to help you with people, getting on board with the metrics, but it's also going to help with engagement. They're going to feel like they're adding value to the company. They're going to feel more engaged at work. Now, for best practices, this one I really like is benchmark within an industry or within a company. So for many of you out there, if you have multiple sites that produce the same product, that's going to be really good because you won't really have a problem sharing data within a company. At least I hope you don't. But you'll be able to definitely measure the differences between your processes. Otherwise, it's really difficult. So this one here, the example I have for you, this annual maintenance cost as a percentage of replacement asset value. So when I was working in mining, we purchased the Maintenance and Reliability Best Practices book by Ramesh Gulati. And in there, they had some statistics for best practices on this metric. And the statistic was, you should be to be world class in this metric, maintenance cost as percentage of replacement asset value, you should be around 1% to 2%. So my manager came to me and he said, Rob, I want you to calculate this for the mobile equipment, which you can see in the picture, or the plant equipment. So I pulled out, did some calculations, and for the mobile equipment, we were in the neighborhood of 20% per year. Now, it's really difficult to kind of trend and compare between mobile mining equipment and a plant environment, whether that's manufacturing or a power plant or whatever. The duty on it is very different. Obviously, as you all know, you've been around the industry, so you have to be very careful. And then the next kind of step within that is you wouldn't be able to compare and say, well, that 20% is bad. Well, we don't really know if it's bad. Maybe compared to other mining companies, maybe they're at 25. We don't really know. And so it kind of puts, if you're able to compare within your industry or within your same company, it's really going to be helpful for you to understand. It's going to give you context to that number. Balancing metrics to me is when you're measuring a department or a person on something, this is one of the most important factors that I see. And what do I mean by a balancing metric? What I mean is metrics that kind of offset each other. So in most cases, 100% or zero is not the optimal answer. It's not the best practice for your product. And so, for example, if we're looking at availability, yes, your manager wants 100% availability. However, if you're including if you're doing your PMs and you're doing your predictive maintenance, you're not really ever going to be able to achieve 100%. Maybe you're achieving 95 or 99. So you kind of need offsetting metrics so then people don't push things too far. So I gave you a couple examples here. So stocked MRO per replacement asset value. So this one we're talking about what spare parts are we holding as a percentage of your replacement asset value, and then the opposite side is your stockouts. So how many times do we run out of parts when we need it? If we're talking to our MRO department and they're bonused off both of these, that's good, because the stock to MRO per replacement asset value, they're going to want to push that number down. They're going to want to hold less parts. So then that number looks good. And then the same thing is, I made a mistake here. Stock outs. Yeah. So I didn't make a mistake, but your stock outs, they're going to want to push that number down as well, which means that they're going to want to hold more parts. And so you're going to achieve a little bit of a balance where you're not stocking enough and you're not stocking too much. Similarly to the next example, your uptime versus predictive maintenance hours. So your uptime, you're going to want to increase that, which is going to be, good for your plant. But then again, if you're getting 100% uptime, you're not doing your maintenance. So there's going to be a little balance of that. And that's where the PMs and predictive maintenance hours is going to kind of help offset both of those metrics. This one here, number 8, ensure individuals can affect the outcome. This is something that I'm sure you've all seen, and you've probably all been accountable, I guess, for a metric that you couldn't affect. And so it's something like when maybe you're the reliability engineer and they're telling you like, hey, we need you to be able to increase the plant's profitability. And yes, there is some aspects, if you're doing good reliability practices, you're doing good maintenance practices, yes, your plant will be more profitable. But in the short term, there's nothing really that you can do that will really affect that number in a meaningful way in most cases. And so these are sometimes, if you're bonusing someone off a metric they can't affect, they're going to become disengaged. If that number doesn't look good, they're going to be frustrated because maybe they're doing the best job that they can, but they don't have impact on that metric. And so it's really difficult for them. They'll start blaming other people. The culture will start to deteriorate. So it's something to be really careful with, is if you're going to be measuring an individual on a metric, ensure that it's something that they can affect. So with a planner, it could be something as simple as how many job plans did they create in a week. That can be something that they can come in Monday and they can bang out job plans and they have almost full control of that. Number 9, set realistic targets. So this one is going to be kind of along that reliability journey. And so I know it's been kind of cool lately. I've heard in not only like in personal development, but also in the corporate environment, that people are doing these, huge outrageous targets or these outrageous goals. And they're talking about like, oh, next year I'm really hoping that I can, 10x my profitability. And that's fine. And I understand the point they're trying to make about thinking bigger. But I would caution people against using those as an improvement tool. And the reason I say that is, for everyone listening, I don't know if you guys are marathon runners, but I'm not. And I just think of myself and I say, like, if my goal was, hey, Rob, next year I'm going to run the Boston Marathon in 3 hours or less. Regardless of how hard I work, I'm never going to achieve that goal. And so at some point, I'm going to become frustrated. I'm going to become, that old guy who's not happy in the plant, right? And you have to be very careful, especially if you're tying it to some sort of financial incentive, or you're tying it, even if it's just a metric that people look at. If you're saying like, hey, Rob, you didn't hit this 100% PM compliance this year, like, you're not doing your job correctly. You have to be realistic. You have to give people kind of a stepping stone to success. And so oftentimes, in reliability, we talk about this 8 to 10 year change. Your metrics are going to change slowly, and so you have to have patience with them. And so in this example of the PM compliance of 50%, maybe the next year you shoot for 60, and then maybe you shoot for 70, and you just work it slowly, and you keep taking those steps forward. The last one I got for you is set metrics between departments to achieve results. So this one's a fun one, and it's probably, I haven't seen it done at too many sites, but the crux of the statement is to get departments to work together to achieve a metric. And so the few examples I put down, so PM compliance for the operations department. So PM compliance, in most cases, we would say that that's a maintenance metric. But if we say to operations, hey, you need to actually give us the equipment so then we can do our PMs, and we start saying, hey, we're tracking PM compliance for you, then the operations department is more likely to turn that equipment over versus just if they're getting bonused off of production, then maybe they don't do PMs and they're just, banging it out until the end of the month. So that's a good example for that. The other one is uptime for the maintenance department. So this one helps kind of looking at, can we get rid of some of those unnecessary PMs or some unnecessary predictive maintenance? Can we help operations have that equipment longer? Those types of things are going to be good to do. So just to recap, there's 4 things that you shouldn't do or you should just be aware of. One is that measurement changes behavior. So that's that Hawthorne effect. So that's the short-term boost just based on measurement. The incentives change behavior. So if you're having people look at it or you're giving financial metrics, they're going to change it. The third one, if you track it, they'll hit it. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you just have to be aware of secondary consequences to that. And then the last one is metric overload. If you measure everything, you're not measuring anything. Some best practices: align with corporate goals, start with that asset management framework, benchmark within industry. That's so you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. Use balancing metrics. So if you're looking at a department, there's going to be 1 or 2 that are going to be helping us hit that optimal amount. Ensure individuals can affect the outcome. Again, going back to that job plans example for the planners, they actually have impact on that metric. Last one, or second last one, set realistic targets. Don't shoot for the moon in year 1. Take some steps towards that, and then you can build it out over a few years. And then the last one, set interdepartmental metrics. So as we mentioned, PM compliance for operations is going to help both the operations department and the maintenance department. So that's just a good example for that. I threw out there, if you haven't got it, I would definitely recommend checking out the CMRP best practice metrics PDF. It's around 200, 250 pages, and it's got pretty much every maintenance and reliability metric that you'll need. And then it's got all this stuff: definitions, objectives, formulas, sample calculations, a bunch of that stuff. So definitely check that out. It's free for it's free for members, and you can just check that out on their website. And yeah, thank you. So just some plugs here: Rob's Reliability Project podcast, available on your favorite podcast platform. The tip of the day is a 1-minute audio tip. It's a podcast, but it's also available as an Amazon Alexa flash briefing. Follow Rob's Reliability Project on LinkedIn, and my website's robsreliability.com if you want to sign up for my weekly newsletter or you want to just hit me up, it's all on there. That's all I got for you. Do you have any questions? And yeah, thanks to UE Systems for having me.
Awesome, Rob. Yeah. So if folks have questions, they can send those in. I'll just reiterate. He mentioned the SMRP best practice metrics. Awesome resource. Again, it is free if you are a member of SMRP. If you're not, it's not that expensive to join SMRP, and there's just a ton of great resources and benefits. We also at our conference will host the SMRP best practice metrics workshop. So a really cool kind of hands-on experience where you get to actually work through those metrics and work on how you calculate them. And it went really well at our conference last year, and so we're hoping to do that again. They hold that at other conferences throughout the year as well. So as you're kind of looking at conferences that you guys might be attending, definitely see if that's offered, because this is obviously a topic of interest. That's a great way to learn even more about that. So great information there, and obviously, Rob, what you shared today has been fantastic. So one question that I was going to throw out, just when you talk about setting realistic targets, what's kind of the flip side of that is like, well, what if you're just then hitting all of those? Where's kind of that line of setting realistic, but also trying to push yourselves to always strive to do better?
Yeah, this is a fine line. So it's that you want to be setting targets that are realistic but not too far ahead. And I mean, you can always change the metrics. So let's say we go back to that PM compliance one where you're starting at 50% and maybe you say, hey, by the end of 2020, I'm hoping to hit 60. Maybe if by June you hit 60, then have your barbecue, celebrate, and then set it even higher, set it to 65 or set it to 70. That's the thing with these types of things is you can always reset and get after it. But I think if you set it and say like by the end of 2020, I'm going to be at 100, otherwise you're all going to be in trouble, then you're really going to get to a point where you're just killing culture. And I'll give you one example. So I was part of this company a few years ago, and they had this thing going on, and they wanted to triple profitability in the next year. And you started, like we thought, okay, well, this is going to change a lot. Like if we go to that marathon example, it's like we're expecting them to start running every day, and we're expecting them to get a coach to help them, train, and we expect them to start eating healthier, but nothing really changed. And so you start to destroy your culture from the inside. And I think that's the problem with some of these metrics. If you're shooting too high and you're not changing your processes and you're not acting in a way that's going to hit those metrics, then you might as well just not start at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, something that I guess, like you said, it's just these are living things and just constantly taking a look at them. So, all right. Another question came in. So this person said, "Hey, Rob, I liked the part of setting interdepartmental KPIs between maintenance and operations departments. However, how does one manage to get buy-in from management to measure that?" Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so buy-in with anything is going to be one of your biggest struggles as a reliability guy. And that's the one thing is my recommendations for this. I mean, you're going to need executive sponsorship for this because oftentimes metrics are driven from the top down. And so what you'll want to do is you're going to have to probably put a cost benefit analysis together and really prove out your case that for that example between maintenance and operations, like if you can have the operations team helping you and you can have the to get your PM compliance or to get your maintenance done, you're going to be far more successful than vice versa. And the thing I always like to say is the check is signed by the same, it comes out of the same bank account. So we're all on the same team. And that's something that I think we forget.
That's a great point. All right. So let's see. Yeah. I'm going to change the screen back over. I've got a few closing slides. But I want to reiterate again, and he put all his contact info and the websites and everything up there, but there's few people on LinkedIn that are as gracious with their kind of time and ability to provide comments and feedback as Rob. So really encourage you to get engaged with Rob on LinkedIn, and you'll just see there's just kind of this whole community following that questions like what we're asked today and advice and feedback and whatnot, it's all right there, and a really cool way to connect with folks that you don't necessarily get the chance to meet in the real world. So just wanted to reiterate that. So again, Rob, thank you so much, and definitely check out the podcast this week. We're excited to have been featured, and so hopefully folks can learn a few things about ultrasound and STEAM as we kind of continue our journey here about trying to educate as best we can. We have all of our online training classes, and we will be launching our annual holiday sale on those. So stay tuned. Keep an eye on those inboxes. I know this is the time of year where all those holiday sale emails come out, but hopefully this is one that's going to improve your brain and not just another gadget, right? So just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that. And then I'll leave our contact info up. Certainly reach out to me if you have any questions about today and you can't get in touch with Rob, you can certainly hit me up and I can get you guys connected. But I thank everybody for spending some time with us today. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day, a great Thanksgiving. We're certainly thankful for all of you guys, and we'll catch you guys later.